Hey folks, it's Nate. Thanks for joining me for another iconic comic review, and today we are taking a look at Kindred Heavens Book 2, which just came in from the Kickstarter. This is a book that is produced by Studio Baba, a group that consists of Bryce Beal and Scott Malin, with Beal doing the writing and Malin doing the art. And it is kind of an independent studio. I'm not sure exactly what the details of the business relationship between them and Iconic Comics are, but they seem to be kind of set off on their own. They work in their own world. This is a world with an alternative history. This story itself takes place in the 1920s. And I think that's fine. I think it's pretty neat that Iconic can kind of have some tighter continuity between some of its storylines. Things like Soul Finder and Black Hops and even Common America. And it can have these other books that are kind of on their own, doing their own thing, interested in different types of stories. And I was pretty excited to check out book one. I was kind of wondering how they were going to split off and handle different kinds of stories. And I was very surprised by how engaged I was with book one, because this is a story about racing. It's about racing these, they call these wind racers right here. So the kind of sport is right there in the name. And they're these kind of diesel punk flying machines or hovercraft, basically. They hover, 2 to 4 feet over the ground. It's kind of hard to tell in the pictures if there's a fixed height or if they can modulate it to a certain extent. One thing that's never really been established is why they have wind racers, but we haven't really seen like a full-blown airplane, I don't think. If we have, it's been like in the background and not a whole lot of attention has been pulled to it. But either way, it's just sort of like pod racing in 1920s America, basically. It's a fun sport. There's some pretty good action sequences in it. In the first volume, there's really only one major wind race in this volume, but we'll get to that in a second. All in all, it's difficult to talk about this book without spoiling at least a little bit some things that happened in the first book. That said, it's very difficult for me to give my full thoughts on this, even from a reviewer's point of view, without giving those details. So if you're interested in the first book or the story overall, I would recommend watching my first review before coming to this one, and maybe making a decision about that book from there before you decide anything about Volume 2. But if you want to hear about everything you're getting into, what Volume 2 is like, before you make any decisions about the series, just be aware I am going to have to tell you a little bit about the story in order to really make it work. So, this is a series with very tight continuity, and that is in fact going to be part of my critique here, because the tightness of the continuity and the things that Beal and Malin do in this book has to be considered in the light of the previous book. This is not so much like Common America, where each volume is kind of a standalone adventure that also ties into a larger meta plot. This is a direct continuation of the events we see in Volume 1. So, let's start by commenting, as I usually do, on the quality of the product itself. Physically, this is a great book. It has the usual Iconic comic quality. It has that great paper stock. It's a soft cover, glue bound from the looks of it. And it's not as nice as their hardcovers, because I don't think anything is really as nice as a hardcover. But there was no hardcover option on the Kickstarter. And honestly, as not a huge fan of the sports kind of genre in comics, I think a soft cover is more where my where the ultimate ratio between price point satisfaction would be. A really expensive book would be nice, but I don't know if I would be willing to shell out for such a genre that has less interest for me. And so having this soft cover is a nice price point. Hopefully there will be a hardcover at some point for people who, really geek out about hardcover books. Because if this is your kind of book, having that really beautiful collector's edition would be great. Malin's art is really fantastic. He has this sense of the cartoony, and maybe that's not the best word. This is kind of like a balance between Studio Ghibli and maybe a Disney afternoon cartoon, and you can really see the kind of very appealing, bright, colorful characters there that are his stock in trade. He does a great job animating them. His expressions are beautiful. They have a very wide gamut of emotions. I have critiqued some other artists for having difficulty or even avoiding showing us certain kinds of emotions on the faces of their characters. And I'll confess, it's very difficult to sell those emotions. When you're the artist, you have to be the actor for every character in your book. And Malin, he handles that task with panache. It's really impressive. These characters, their faces can run a whole spectrum of emotions in just a few pages. And it's very challenging. I think part of it is just the benefit of this more simplistic style. It really lets him sell his characters' facial expressions without having to spend a huge amount of time on them, which I think is what kind of add that lack of authenticity or the almost surreal nature to some comic art that I've seen. So it's a beautiful book. There's some really great artistic flourishes to it as well. I don't remember if this was in volume 1, but there's this use of a sepia tone over panels to indicate they're in flashback. Also, dream sequences, which we did see in the first volume, are done in this much looser, more watercolory style. And both of these serve as a really great at-a-glance shorthand for looking at something that is out of the narrative in a certain way. And I like that. That really helps audiences track very easily with what is going on in a medium like comics, where you do not have the same kind of transitions that you do in something like television. And I've noticed this especially in like the big two comics. They don't seem to be able to mark a transition in time without anything other than a caption box. And while caption boxes get the job done, they are somewhat intrusive. And having these simpler, very fast visual markers, I think they suit the medium better. And I think they give each story more of its own flavor. With this being a book that is set in a pseudo-1920s area, that sepia tone does kind of call to mind newspaper photographs or even old photo albums of pictures that were taken in that time period. This is the kind of visual design that I really geek out about. It's not the core of the story, but it's when everything else is there, I think it fires really well. So kudos to everyone involved who thought up this stuff. I have exactly one critique here, and I should have put a bookmark in because there are actually page numbers in this one, and kudos to Studio Baba for that. I'm so used to not having them, I didn't have anything to write this down with when I spotted it. So here it is. Oh, I guess there's not a page number on this one, but it is on the opposite page. Okay, so this is a nitpick. We're going to be really, really picky here because this is pretty much the only visual element in the book I found that seemed out of place. It's a really beautiful and well done book. But there are little things in it that, once all your big stuff is in place, it's worthwhile to watch out for, and this is one of them. We have here a sequence of 3 panels where Carl is talking, and it's the speech balloons in them are not intuitive. This balloon naturally draws the eye over to this balloon, and I wound up reading these two together before I realized that no, I'm actually supposed to come down to this panel here and read this balloon before I come back up to here. But there is no division between these two balloons, and that made it very hard to tell what the flow of the text was. It doesn't help that the panels overlap. The smaller panels are partially inset into the larger panel. So again, my eye was naturally drawn into that large panel because there was no solid break between the smaller panels and the large panel. Finally, all of the text balloons end with ellipses. So with an ellipse at the end of oil slick hands and at the beginning of it sees everyone, at a glance, those two things just naturally pair into each other. Now, the bottom speech balloon that I'm actually supposed to read also begins with an ellipse. So there's a bunch of different ways the confusion could have been avoided here. You could have cut off the ellipse before it. You could have put a solid break between those. You could have done a couple of other different things. But this is a very small nitpick, and it only happens once in the book. So really, it's a much more positive reading experience than that would suggest. It's not a chronic issue. It doesn't happen a ton. It's literally just the one page where I noticed it. And, sometimes you have an idea for something really creative. And in this particular sequence of panels, something specific is happening with Carl that I think they wanted to show the progression of emotions. But in order to get the full effect of that, you have to read the text and pair it with his expressions. And when the text is naturally pushing you to a part of the story that is out of sequence, then you entirely miss the progression. You have to rewind, start it all over, and it takes you right out of the story. Not great, but again, an extremely minor issue in a otherwise visually very well done story. The only other thing I noticed visually is there is chess is used as a visual example a couple of times here. And as a big fan of chess puzzles, I noticed that the board starts... the board is shown to us in a very advanced state, and at a glance, it was very hard to tell that we were looking at it from the side. I managed to work it out eventually. But, yeah, I had some questions because the pawns didn't look intuitive. But, yeah, there was... I think that, honestly, showing it to us from the back or with a person sitting at it would have been better. Because, again, I kind of blue screened for a moment. I'm like, wait, how did this happen? And then my brain resets it. Oh, I'm looking at it from the side rather than from one player's side or the other. I'm looking at from, the sides of the board. And that's not a way most people, I think, are used to looking at a chessboard. I could be wrong about that. But that jumped out to me a little bit too. I think I probably would have made a note about that if I was the editor, but I think it could also be fine as is. It is not, as glaring a technical issue as not having, a clear flow to the text on your page. Other than that, two very, very minor issues disrupt the visual storytelling here. So let's talk about the story itself. This is a pretty solid sports story formula. There's a big event coming up, the Diamond Straight. Team Voight, which is our protagonist Isabella's racing team, is short on cash. They're being hounded by the press because their rival team, Team Cerberus, has blabbed some team secrets to them, and the reporters are all showing up asking questions. Their primary pilot, Felix, which is Isabella's brother, has just quit due to a disagreement between Felix and Carl, which is his father, also Isabella's father, by the transitive property. And all of this is pretty good sports story formula storytelling. We have an underdog team. They're working on this machine that they're going to take to the races. They need to get it ready. Their previous machine got wrecked, so they're trying to build one from scratch. All pretty good elements of the story. Also, there's tension between Isabelle, who wants to fly, and Carl, who doesn't want her to fly, because his wife died in a wind racer accident of some kind. We don't see it in its entirety. We kind of get some hints to it in flashbacks, primarily in book 1, not so much in this book. It's good, solid storytelling. There's no issues with it, and it gives us an opportunity for a lot of good character moments. We get to see, Isabel and Carl test each other. We get some very sweet moments between Isabel and Felix, and also Isabel and Robin, who is the official backup pilot for Team Voight, and is Isabel's, sweetheart. Those moments are all pretty good. The story also includes Isabel seeking out a mentor figure to help her get a better handle on the race, the art of racing, and all that. I don't have a problem with any of these elements. They are rock solid. They all make sense in the world. They build to a decent conclusion. But, and this is where I said we have to think about this as a direct sequel to Volume 1. And as a direct sequel to Volume 1, I don't think any of it works that well. At the end of Volume 1, we had this big blow-up between Team Voight and Team Pegasus, I guess, is the Voight family racing team. We had a big blow-up between Team Pegasus and Team Cerberus. And they were going to settle things at the Diamond Straight, the big upcoming race. I sat down to read this, really excited to see how the Diamond Straight raised the stakes on this conflict and how it resolved maybe some of the smaller elements of conflict. However, by the end of this book, we haven't even begun the Diamond Straight. That was very frustrating because my expectations had been set that the next big point of conflict was going to be the Diamond Straight itself. And instead, we got Isabel going to find a trainer, which is a fine element to have in this kind of, sports and competition-driven story. But it didn't really pay off what Beale had told us to expect at the end of the previous volume, which was the Diamond Straight itself. That was frustrating. Also, in Volume 1, Isabel is working on a jet engine. There were some plans that her father and mother were apparently working on before her mother's death, and she was trying to make them functional. That's mentioned in this book, but it is not advanced at all. Again, very frustrating, because I had this expectation set by Volume 1 that the jet engine was going to be the next step forward in wind racing, and we were going to get hints of that, we were going to see the potential of that. Maybe not the dream fully realized, but the potential of it at the Diamond Straight. But we didn't even get to the Diamond Straight in this volume. It was clear to me that there was going to be some kind of resolution between Isabel and Felix at some point very soon. It was pretty clear that Felix didn't want to be a wind racer, and he was happy to move aside and let his sister do it, if his dad would just give his permission for Isabel to race. We got that paid off very early in the book, which is good. That's pretty much what I was expecting to see at some point in this book. But otherwise, the story threads that were set up in Volume 1 were just, except for the escalation of conflict between Team Cerberus and Team Pegasus in, this attempt at sabotage by putting the reporters on Team Pegasus, that conflict pretty much goes unaddressed. We got a little bit of a hint at it when Carl Voight goes to speak with a man who frequently sponsored him, and Carl finds himself compared to the leader of Team Cerberus, which is Alexander. Kind of blanking on his last name there, but Carl finds himself compared to Alexander. And that was an interesting character beat, but it didn't tell us very much about how the conflict between the two men was going to progress. All in all, it felt like Volume 1 set up a bunch of elements that Volume 2 proceeded to put on the back burner. And in one aspect, that's a fine problem to have, because Volume 1 is a good, well-told story, and Volume 2 is a good, well-told story. But, as I said before, they have a really tight continuity with each other. Volume 2 basically picks up at the end of the giant wrecked party that Team Cerberus was throwing, and it doesn't really progress much of anything that Volume 1 was doing. I'm not here to try and write the story for Bryce Beal. If I was an editor giving him feedback, I don't know what I would have told him, honestly, at this point. But I would have suggested, perhaps, that Isabel could wait to go on her training journey until after the Diamond Straight. And maybe we could even wait to knock Team Pegasus down with the reporters until after that sporting event, just so we could pay off that plot beat that we'd been building to through Volume 1. I did not find this installment in the story as satisfying as I had expected to. And now, even though we end Book 2 with racers lining up their vehicles for the Diamond Straight, I'm not sure that the expectations that I was given for this event in Volume 1 can be paid off at all. Which is too bad. Because I thought Volume 1 of Kindred Heavens was a really, really tightly written, well-paced introduction to this world of wind racing. And I kind of feel like that pacing and that focus are gone from Volume 2, even though the story itself is solid. There's no character contradictions, the motivations all check out. The study of the characters is pretty good. I kind of feel like there are some characters, such as Robin, in particular, that we could get a little more of. Robin is a pretty important relationship in Isabel's life, and I kind of feel like after 2 volumes of him being a major figure in the main character's life, we should know a little bit more about him. But even that, it's still, he's still a very likable character, and I am curious, how his relationship dynamic is going to hold up as he and Isabel are kind of like both looking to be competitors in this very, very big, high-stakes field. The real issue, I think, is just one of expectations. And I had very different expectations based on Volume 1 than Volume 2 really paid off. And, part of that is, your expectations are yours, not necessarily the author's. But I also know every author sits down intending to build stakes for their audience. And I do feel that Volume 1 is going to give you a pretty bad sense of what Volume 2 is going to be. And I think that is an issue for a story that is looking to maintain this kind of page-to-page continuity. When the final page of Volume 1 leads right into the first page of Volume 2, I think a little more flow and continuity in the stakes is something the author really has to watch out for. And I feel like Studio Baba dropped the ball on that in this story. It's not an insurmountable obstacle. Like I said, all the fundamentals of story, the characters, the progression of the narrative, and even the thematic elements are all very well handled. It's just the expectations that are not well managed in the story. However, if you drop the ball on expectations, it can leave the audience feeling really let down. And I definitely felt that in this volume. So, do I recommend picking up Volume 2 of Kindred Heavens? Not if you haven't read Volume 1. Again, because of that really tight continuity. If you like these kind of, sports-driven stories that use the sport kind of as a way to dig deeper into characters, you may enjoy Kindred Heavens. If that is not your jam, I don't know as I can really recommend the story right now, because it seems it's got really solid character work and a strong sense of how the characters tie into their themes, and it explores them very well. But the conflict and the stakes and the expectations are kind of all over the board right now, and that makes me leery of predicting how future installments of the story are going to go. And we don't have a completed narrative arc yet. So this isn't even something like, Common America, where I could say the first 4 volumes are really great, but the second 4 volumes are even better. So maybe start with the second 4 volumes before you go and, pick up the first 4. I can't even make that kind of recommendation yet. This is one of the pitfalls, I think, of trying to give a solid analysis of an indie comic that is ongoing. Because independent stories in particular tend to just spin out major story arcs for a really long time. And in this case, the spinning out of the story, I think, has been somewhat to the detriment of the story. I don't know how this is going to turn out. But everything else is so good, I think I am going to give Volume 3 a try. And we'll see if Beale and Malin can land the plane, so to speak, and bring a really solid payoff to the threads that they're playing around with. But until I have read that volume and drawn some conclusions from it, I'm going to be somewhat reserved in my recommendation on this comic. I think Kindred Heavens right now should be viewed as a good comic for character study. And I can't really safely say anything else about it, which is unfortunate. The first Kindred Heavens really impressed me, and I was hoping that level of quality would continue to be put forth. And I recognize that oftentimes your first volume is the best because you spent so much more time working on it and refining it. But what can I say? I'm not the one making the story. I'm just the one trying to decide who would enjoy it. And I know that I found a lot to like here, but I also found it to be a bit of a letdown. And all I can really tell you guys is go in with your eyes open. It's not the most satisfying installment in a story that I've seen, even in the last month. Well, that's all I have to say about Kindred Heavens, I guess. If you've checked it out, let me know what you thought. Let me know if you were as disappointed that we didn't get to the big race in this volume. And let me know if you're planning to check out Volume 3. While you're down there, there's a like button and a subscribe button. You can use those as you see fit. And I'll talk to you later.